See you then. Please join us.
A new view of Ground Zero and a new, though gentle reminder about what lies ahead.
The hope is still there that we might be able to save some lives. But the reality is that in the last several days we haven't found anyone.
And what will it take to find Osama bin Laden and others accused of terrorism today? The president prepares the public.
This war on terrorism is going to take a while, and the American people must be patient.
Good evening from Washington. I'm Wolf Blitzer along with Joey Chen in Atlanta.
Good evening, Wolf. We want to bring our viewers up to date right away on the latest developments in America's new war on terrorism. President Bush is back at the White House this hour after intensive planning sessions which are held at Camp David. Mr. Bush said the country will launch a crusade to defeat what he called a new kind of evil. He asked the country for patience as his advisor put the country on notice that the war on terrorism is likely to last for years. Vice President Cheney, meantime, confirms that after the Trade Center attacks and the attack on the Pentagon, President Bush approved the downing of the fourth hijacked passenger plane. Cheney said it was the hardest decision Mr. Bush had to make on that day. As we all know, the fourth plane crashed before it reached Washington. President Bush repeated today that Osama bin Laden is the government's prime suspect in connection with Tuesday's attacks, but in a statement released today, bin Laden denied any connection to the suicide assaults and said the perpetrators seem to have had, in his words, personal reasons. The FBI, meantime, is searching an apartment in Delray Beach, Florida, that is underway at this hour, and agents there are removing boxes full of materials. Two of the hijackers are believed to have lived in that apartment. A similar operation has taken place today in New Jersey. And in churches across this nation today, Americans lifted their voices in songs of faith and love of country. Polls are indicating strong support for the nation's leadership in the earliest days of this war against terrorism. A couple of other developments to note today. The Bush administration and Congress are now examining ways to relax restrictions against the CIA. One such restriction is the ban on political assassinations. And Attorney General John Ashcroft says he will ask Congress for expanded law enforcement powers, including broader authority in using wiretaps. The administration says intelligence and law enforcement will represent major components in the war against terrorism. Now on something that we want to show you. We know it is very difficult for our viewers to see this again, but it is to help our understanding of what took place on Tuesday. These are very late images that we're just getting in. As you see, they're shot by an amateur video cameraman taking pictures, as you can see, of one of the towers on fire after the plane went through it, but before, obviously, the final collapse of both of the towers. As you see, this latest video gives you probably the clearest image that we have seen yet of the hole gashed into the side of the World Trade Center towers, and, of course, the burning as well. Another picture that we're just getting in as well from amateur videographer coming in. This shows an engine of one of the jets, obviously, lying on the streets there in the Wall Street area. Very grim pictures, but to help, really, in our understanding of what took place on Tuesday. Wolf?
Joey, coming up this hour, we'll have reports on the support for war among the American public. Senior political analyst Bill Schneider will take us inside the latest poll numbers. We'll also have exclusive reports from Afghanistan. Our Nick Robertson on the mood in the Afghan capital. And Steve Harrigan in the 5% of Afghanistan not controlled by the Taliban. And we'll take you inside one of New York City's hospitals where the worst of the burn victims are being treated. President Bush pledged today the United States will rid the world of evildoers, in his words, following Tuesday's terror attack. The President and Mrs. Bush returned to the White House several hours ago from Camp David. Speaking to reporters, Mr. Bush reiterated that the battle against terrorism will not be easy or quick. And earlier in the day, top Bush administration officials went on the air, appearing on the Sunday talk shows to underscore the president's message. CNN White House correspondent Kelly Wallace has more.
After huddling with his national security team at Camp David, President Bush returns to the White House and urges Americans to try to get on with their lives.
Just like the farmers and ranchers and business owners and factory workers have a job to do, my administration has a job to do, and we're going to do it.
Back to business, but not business as usual, as Mr. Bush and his aides mount a full-court offensive to reassure a jittery public.
We're pursuing over 40,000 leads.
They can't destroy America.
Things have changed since last Tuesday. The world's shifted in some respects.
The administration facing a delicate balancing act, encouraging an anxious country to go back to work, while making the case its campaign against terrorists and those who harbor them will not be an overnight solution.
It will take time. It's not a matter of days or weeks. It's years. It's going to take the support of the American people, and I have every confidence it'll be there.
The support is there now. In a CNN USA Today Gallup poll, 86% said they support a military action even if it lasts several months. Support drops, though, to 66% if a conflict lasts several years. For a public angry about how these tragedies could have happened, Attorney General John Ashcroft says he will send proposals to Capitol Hill in days to strengthen laws to track terrorists.
We will develop the tools.
While Secretary of State Colin Powell calls for a return to normalcy.
If we stick in our bunkers and walk around afraid, they will have won. Well, we're not a fearful people. We know how to overcome tragedy, and we will restore a sense of normalcy to this society, to this country very quickly in a way that will impress the world.
To underscore that point, tomorrow, Treasury Secretary Paul O'Neill rings the opening bell at the New York Stock Exchange, and Major League players return to the ball fields, while the administration continues planning its response to the worst act of terrorism on U.S. soil. Kelly Wallace, CNN, near Camp David, Maryland.
And as Kelly just reported, an overwhelming number of Americans believe the U.S. military should retaliate for Tuesday's terror attacks. According to the CNN USA Today Gallup poll, 88% of those surveyed support such retaliation. Only 8% were opposed. Most Americans also believe the U.S. should mount a long-term war to eliminate terrorism worldwide. 86% of those polled said they would support a U.S. military action if it lasts for several months. And 66% said they would support such an action if it lasted even several years. CNN senior political analyst Bill Schneider joins us now with more on some perspective. It doesn't appear, Bill, that there's much indication, at least now, of a division in the American public.
Well, we are seeing a little indication of division, and I can tell you I just saw evidence of it driving across the mall behind us in front of the Capitol, where people were at a rally behind a sign, a large sign that said, "Justice, not revenge," as if this should be treated as a crime, not as an act of war. There is a division over a basic issue, which is what should our objective be in this war. We found a majority this weekend, but only a bare majority, 52%, endorsing the view that the U.S. should mount a long-term war to eliminate terrorist groups worldwide. A substantial minority, 36%, believe our war aim should be more limited, to find and punish the specific terrorist groups responsible for this attack, and another 6% don't want the U.S. to take any military action at all. That's over 40% who do not endorse the larger war aim that this administration is pressing for. We see a big division here between men and women. Women do not support the larger war aim, men do. And this is the only place where there's a division between parties. Republicans favor the all-out war against terrorism. Democrats are divided. So this is a potential source of division over a basic issue. What should the war objective be?
And you've been studying poll numbers for many years. How do these numbers, the mood right now, compare to previous U.S. military engagements?
Well, there's a basic difference. In this, we were attacked. That's not true of Korea, Vietnam, the Cold War, the Gulf War. We were attacked, so the president and the administration don't have to really rally the public the way, say, his father did in the Gulf War. The public has already rallied. Now, in the past, we found that support for wars varies with several things. One, the losses. As the losses mount, support goes down. Second, the time it takes. As the war goes on and on, inconclusively, support goes down. I think there's going to be a lot more patience and a lot more tolerance of losses because we were attacked. But there's a third condition that applies, and that's politics. Americans believe that wars should not be fought for limited purposes. They should be fought to win. They have very little patience and have shown very little in the past for getting involved in other countries' politics. But how do we avoid politics in this case when the U.S. objective is not to defeat another country like Japan, but to persuade their governments to cooperate with us? If they don't, we'll get them out of power, and then we become responsible for whatever government takes over in their country, which means politics may be unavoidable, and that could be a problem down the road.
When you saw these latest CNN USA Today Gallup poll numbers come in, was there any huge surprise as far as you were concerned, or are these numbers predictable?
Well, they were predictable because of what happened. Certainly, even Democrats are rallying to support the president. The president right now has an 86% job rating. That's no surprise. It's almost as high as his father's was in the Gulf War. No, I wouldn't say I was surprised by the unity, but I also was surprised. I was a bit surprised to see that on the issue of the basic objective, what are we trying to accomplish here? To punish the perpetrators or to win an all-out war against terrorism? There really is a division. It's what the sign said on the mall. Are we looking for justice or are we looking for revenge?
Bill Schneider, our senior political analyst, thank you very much. Joey?
Well, for his part, with all the talk about Osama bin Laden himself is denying any involvement in the U.S. terror attacks. Now, take a look at this. These are statements from Osama bin Laden released today from the Gulf state of Qatar. A quote here: "After the recent attacks, which the U.S. has witnessed, the U.S. government ventured to point fingers at me, accuse me of involvement. The U.S. government has consistently blamed me for being behind every occasion its enemies attack it. I would like to assure the world that I did not plan the recent attacks, which seem to have been planned by people for personal reasons. As for me, I have been living in the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan and following its leader's rules. The current leader does not allow me to exercise such operations." Osama bin Laden, Afghanistan, just two of the world players in whatever move the United States will make next. To help us understand what is important to what lies ahead, we're joined this hour by former Secretary of the Navy James Webb, who has inside perspective of the decisions facing the nation's military, as well with us Robin Wright of the Los Angeles Times, international correspondent with a very in-depth knowledge of this region. First, Mr. Secretary, I'd like to begin with you to talk to you a little bit about the relationship between diplomacy and military decisions here. Can you tell us why these things have to go hand in hand?
Well, I mean, listening to the poll numbers and the discussion about that just preceded your question, you can see that people are talking about two different things when really they're interrelated. We need to develop policies that will address accountability for the actions that have occurred, but also to carry them forward into a situation where you can preempt and prevent these kinds of actions in the future. And in order to do that, you're going to have to take it to the places where these people have trained and where they have logistical support. The Islamic fundamentalist terrorist movement over the past 20 years or so has done a very good job of sort of writing what you would call a seam in international law and policy. They have been afforded certain protections by different countries at the same time, while they have never been specifically sponsored by different countries. And that's a distinction that's going to have to go away. But in order to solve this problem, we're going to have to go in a long-term, on a long-term basis from accountability for these acts to precluding them into the future to developing a diplomatic format where we can address the problems that have fed many of the anxieties. So they all interrelate.
They do all interrelate, and we want to talk a little bit more about that, but I want you to help our viewers understand. This is a map of Afghanistan. Help us understand the topography, the geographical considerations in making a strike against Osama bin Laden, if that is ultimately what is decided by the administration. It is tremendously rough country.
I think the best thing to say about those sorts of military options is that Secretary Rumsfeld is an extremely capable individual. He's got a great team with him. We've got a president leading us here, and it would be wrong to second-guess them at this point. It may be Afghanistan. It may not be Afghanistan. The first thing that we really need to do is to develop domestic policies that will allow us to penetrate the cells which I guess are already in this country and to eliminate them. And then the military options that are being addressed right now are something that I think we should sit back and allow to occur. It is a tough place, yeah.
You know, we heard from the administration earlier in the day, a number of the administration members talking through the importance of what is ahead and emphasizing that this would be a war, a different sort of war than what Americans have seen in the past, that the emphasis will be on both intelligence and policing. Can you explain that to us?
Yes, and well, also, the president not too long ago mentioned that we need to bring other sorts of power that we as a nation have to the fore. We have diplomatic power. I think we're seeing some interesting developments, for instance, in the cooperation right now of Pakistan. And we have to be very careful how we play those cards, because this is a region where you have had tensions between Pakistan and India, India and China, China assisting Pakistan, and China has its own design. So they're having to walk a very, very delicate balance there to pull together the international cooperation. We also have economic power. The president mentioned it, and we need to use those levers when we can. But at bottom, what we have to do, as I said, in a three-step process, is eliminate the terrorist cells in this country, to get to where they are in the other countries, wherever that may be, and to serve notice to nations that may be protecting them, that we will cross international borders. We have that right under the UN Charter to protect American lives. We will cross their borders, if necessary, to take out people who are planning attacks against the United States. And then, thirdly, to address the diplomatic environment so that we can hopefully eliminate this as a threat. Cut this cancer away from the populations that have now been supporting it, tacitly or otherwise, and then hopefully move into a different kind of a world. That is the objective of all of this.
James Webb, former Secretary of the Navy, giving us particular insight and understanding into the issues that face the government today. Also with us at this hour is Robin Wright from the Los Angeles Times. As I mentioned earlier, she is an international correspondent and has tremendous insight and knowledge about this particular region in the course of her coverage. Robin, we want to sort of pull out from what James Webb was just talking about, this notion of the involvement of other nations and how they play into this. We have talked quite a bit on our air about Pakistan in particular in its relationship to Afghanistan. Explain to our viewers that even if there is cooperation offered, it is not all that easy to come by, particularly for this state that we believe to have some nuclear capability.
Pakistan is indeed a very unstable place. We have to remember that the military government came to power a couple of years ago by aborting a democratic process, overthrowing a democratic government. And it's a rather fragile government today, even though it is led by military leaders. It has its own Islamic problem, Islamic extremists who are operating in Kashmir and whom they don't completely control. It has a large Islamic sector who vote for Islamic parties, and that should the United States be perceived as too heavy-handed or going too far in that part of the world, there could be the kind of backlash that in fact created Osama bin Laden in the first place.
And we advise that Pakistan and Afghanistan share this very long border, quite porous though I understand.
It's a very porous border, and the interesting thing is that there are many in the military who actually look with favor at the Taliban, and they believe that Afghanistan under the Taliban is an important buffer for Pakistan and an important ally when India next door is a predominantly Hindu country with which there are serious territorial disputes.
All right, as well, we talk about the other long border for Afghanistan, and that is Iran. Of course, our viewers thoroughly understand that. To put it very mildly, the United States has had its differences with Iran over the years. Tell us how that plays into the rubric here.
Well, that's really an interesting question because today Secretary of State Powell made a public overture to Iran and indicated that the United States was exploring the possibilities of some kind of role for Iran. Of course, there has been 2 decades of tension dating back to the 1979 takeover of the American embassy. But Iran has the second longest border, and it has its own problems with the Taliban. In fact, the government in Tehran feels greater hostility toward the Taliban than it does to the United States or even toward Israel. It looks down on the Taliban as a primitive force because of their treatment of women, because they allow the largest poppy crop in the world for production of opium and heroin, for its elimination of all culture, from movies to cinema to music. And it feels very threatened by a country next door that is predominantly Sunni, and Iran is predominantly Shiite. So there are a lot of reasons for hostility. And I think the United States would be very interested in exploring just what possibilities there are between the two. It's going to be a long haul. Nothing's going to happen overnight. But Iran plays a critical part in this coalition, and because of its long border.
All right, let's go wider into the region as well. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think along with Pakistan, Saudi Arabia and the UAE, the United Arab Emirates, are the only nations that recognize the Taliban as the government of Afghanistan.
That's right, and they're going to play very important roles too. Part of the problem with Osama bin Laden is not just the networks he's created, but the enormous amount of money he has at his expense to pay for things like flight schools and positioning cells in probably 36 different countries around the world. And rich Saudi individuals have played key roles over the last 20 years in helping fund Osama bin Laden's activities. And so what role Saudi Arabia plays both in cutting off the Taliban and Osama bin Laden financially, and what role the United Arab Emirates plays, because many of these extremists have ended up with Emirate passports.
Right.
So these are 2 countries that are really critically important in this coalition, in getting their cooperation to squeeze both the Taliban and then Osama bin Laden.
And then even though Saudi Arabia has, for example, hosted the U.S. as it participated in the no-fly zones, I mean, Saudi Arabia has been an ally to the United States in this sense, but it isn't necessarily an easy tightrope for the Saudi government to walk either.
That's absolutely right. And in fact, I think one of the big problems is going to be calculating how far we can go in asking for participation by some of these countries without jeopardizing their standing at home. And there's also a moral question for us. We're asking for help from countries, a military regime in Pakistan, one of the world's last autocratic monarchies in Saudi Arabia, another monarchy in the United Arab Emirates, which have among the worst human rights records in the world. And it's going to be a real challenge for us to be able to justify creating a coalition in which they are central players and helping prop them up in order to get at Osama bin Laden.
Thank you very much, Robin Wright of the Los Angeles Times, for your particular insight into this troubled region and why it is not quite as easy as some people might think. We want to understand a little bit more about Afghanistan itself. Now, there are many in that rugged and austere country at this hour preparing for another war at the hands of a very powerful enemy. CNN is the only Western news organization with reporters still in areas under Taliban control, and one of them, CNN's Nick Robertson, who filed a report on a people well accustomed to bloodshed and deprivation.
Bustling trade in Afghanistan's street markets belies an impending sense of isolation beginning to grip many Afghans. Concerns about the likelihood of an American attack and the possibility borders with Pakistan and Iran may close have driven food prices up 10 to 15%. Concern also, Afghan people could become innocent victims. They should wait until it's clear Osama was involved, this vendor says. America shouldn't make any attack on Afghanistan, this trader says, because the Afghan people are not involved and not responsible. Many here, however, are too poor to flee the cities. 22 years of conflict has ruined infrastructure and economy alike. The years of war have also built up a resilience among many Afghans, to the point where a new attack would be a continuation of their ongoing battles. The result of Russian aggression was the breaking of Russia into 16 countries, this old man says, remembering the 1980s Soviet occupation. If America attacks us, Allah will divide America into 52 pieces. From influential tribal elders, not necessarily aligned with the Taliban, however, a call for diplomacy.
We advise the Taliban that they must discuss everything with everyone and not close the doors to negotiation.
However, the tribal elders also said if Afghanistan is attacked, they will back the Taliban to the end, a sentiment echoed on the streets here. As the last of the international aid workers began leaving because the Taliban said they could no longer guarantee their safety, Afghanistan's total isolation appears now closer than ever. Nick Robertson, CNN, Kabul, Afghanistan.
In New York, Mayor Rudy Giuliani says New Yorkers are more united than ever as the massive rescue and recovery efforts at Ground Zero continue. Crews digging through the rubble have yet to find any survivors today. CNN's Bill Hemmer is standing by in Lower Manhattan, and CNN medical correspondent Dr. Sanjay Gupta is at the Cornell Burn Center, where those burns in the attack are being treated. Let's go first to Sanjay Gupta. Sanjay, I want to advise our viewers that some of the video that you have is very graphic. They may not want to watch it, but describe what you are seeing right now.
That's right, Wolf. It's exactly as you say. You know, while there are close to 5,000 missing or dead, there are many survivors who barely escaped with their lives. Been sitting talking to some of these patients in the burn unit, Wolf, here at Weill Cornell Burn Center, one of the largest burn centers in the country, by the way. And some of their stories that I've heard today were actually frankly horrifying. Let's listen to one of them right now.
Just getting into work about 8:45. Getting out of the elevator, walking in the hallway. I was on 83rd floor of the first tower. All of a sudden, as I'm walking in the hallway, I hear a door explode, and just this big ball of fire just engulfed me. I just froze. I didn't do anything. I just stood there.
He just stood there, Wolf, in a large ball of fire. He was looking down the hallway, and this ball of fire just came at him. And it obviously burned him. You could see there on his face and really throughout his entire trunk, his legs, and his arms. I talked to the doctors afterwards. What they told me was rather interesting. About 155-degree temperature for even 1 second will give you a third-degree burn. They think these balls of fire from jet fuel and whatnot up to 1,000 degrees, so 5 to 10 times what it takes to give you a third-degree burn. And these were just literally engulfing people, literally incinerating people as they walked through that building. I talked to another woman, Wolf, who thinks she may in fact have been the last person out of the building. Let's hear from her.
If you don't let me get out of here, I'm not going to be able to make it. Finally, the EMS said, okay, let's go. After we turn around the corner, the whole building collapsed on us. So I'm very, very, very lucky. But any of my friend who's up in the 78th floor, either they got crushed or on the way down to the stairs, they were made.
I sat down and I spoke with her for some time, Wolf, and what she was describing there, she was actually trying to save her boss. She was one of those people who was told actually no need to evacuate the building. She did think that she needed to evacuate the building. Her boss had broken her leg. She was literally dragging her boss through these offices over many other dead bodies. Took an elevator down. When the elevator opened up, a big ball of fire actually killed several of the people in front of the elevator, in front of her. She was able to finally run out of the building, and as she turned around the corner, the entire building collapsed. So just unbelievable, really, really stories, Wolf, that I heard today over here at Weill Cornell.
Sanjay, have they identified all of the burn victims at the Cornell Burn Center and other hospitals in the New York area?
That's what they've told me, Wolf. They have been able to identify all the burn victims at this time. We did talk about a few burn victims that had 90 to 100% burns over the past few days, and they also told us that the patient that we specifically spoke of with 100% burn did indeed pass on.
Our viewers obviously know you're a medical doctor. What kind of prognosis, what is the recovery going to be like for these burn victims?
Well, there's some ways to look at this, and you keep in mind that technology is changing, so the survivability is changing literally by the day. A simple rule of thumb that a lot of the doctors told me and that I learned from medical school was that the percent burn over your body plus your age equals your likelihood of death. So people who have, 50% burns and that may be in their 40s or 50s, you can imagine their likelihood of survival is quite small. They also said your recovery period really for every percent of burn on your body is about the number of days that you'll be spending in the hospital. So for those that have 50 to 60% burns in their body, they'll probably be in the hospital for 2 months, getting skin grafts, getting debridements, getting physical therapy, all those sorts of things. It's an incredibly long and unfortunately incredibly painful road for a lot of these burn victims. But as I said, some of these folks may actually survive this.
Dr. Sanjay Gupta, thank you very much for that information. And let's move across Manhattan now, down to Ground Zero in Lower Manhattan. That's where CNN's Bill Hemmer is standing by. Set the scene for us over there, Bill. What's going on?
Well, Wolf, at this time, the sun is starting to set somewhat to the west, and normally at this time of the night, we should start to see some of the rescuers who have been working inside come out and really trickle away at this point. We were here early this morning, just about 5:30 a.m. About that time and the hours after that, Wolf, we saw hundreds and hundreds of rescuers going in on flatbed trucks heading inside. What you're watching right now, though, is some new videotape. These are aerial shots of what is known now as the site, Ground Zero, Wolf, as you mentioned there. And you can see the utter devastation spread out over so many city blocks here in Lower Manhattan. The other thing that's quite obvious, on the outside of that site there, you can see a number of skyscrapers still standing at this time, and we're told that they still could be quite precarious. Structural engineers going inside at this time throughout the day, trying to determine if indeed those buildings are safe. In the meantime, Wolf, we've talked throughout the weekend here about donations, and we tried to get the word out yesterday that everybody was telling us, please, if you want to help, send money. No more food, no more water, no more clothing. They have plenty of that. And again this afternoon, the governor of New York, George Pataki, reiterated that message. He came out and talked just about 2 hours ago.
To people who want to help, don't come here. We don't need you here now, but you can help. You can join your fire company, join your ambulance corps at home, support the Salvation Army and the Red Cross, and of course you can donate funds, because there are not just thousands of victims, but thousands and thousands of their children and families who are going to need our help as we go through this.
Governor Pataki, a short time ago, also in that briefing, got very emotional, tears at one time, choking back tears as he tried to describe his feelings right now as the search and rescue operation, they're still calling it that, continues here in Manhattan. We did meet one very lucky person today. Dave Lim works for the Port Authority Police Department. He's along with the K-9 unit. He was in the North Tower inside trying to help and rescue people when the tower crashed to the ground. He says he's alive today only because people came to his rescue, and today he had a message as well.
I'm here today, and I'm here to tell everybody, especially the rescuers, that I know that they haven't found anybody in a while, and that you can survive something like this, and I'm living proof of that. If that helps you to keep going, then I've done my job today.
Dave Lim, very courageous man, came out and talked with us earlier today. He says his partner, a yellow lab, has not been heard from since, and clearly he is quite disappointed at this time, and he had some tears as well. There's been a lot of tears this week in New York City. Wolf, the search and rescue operation continues. The mayor today saying 5,097 still missing at this point. Back to you now in Washington.
And as you know, Bill, there have been a lot of tears, not only in New York City, but around the country, indeed, around the world. Thank you very much. This footnote, we've heard countless stories about Americans coming together to help in any way they can in the aftermath of the attacks. And that effort extends to the rescue dogs in New York, who will now get canvas and leather shoes to wear while working in the rubble, thanks to a Wisconsin pet supply company. Spokesman says the special shoes strap onto the dog's paws and help protect them from glass and other debris.
Begin this half hour with an update on today's developments. The FBI has conducted a raid on an apartment in Delray Beach, Florida, the home of at least one of the suspected hijackers aboard the plane that crashed into the Pentagon. Agents have been seen leaving with bags presumably containing evidence. On another front in the investigation, a second man has been arrested as a material witness in the attacks. President Bush says Osama bin Laden remains the prime suspect in the terrorist attacks, despite a statement today in which bin Laden denied any involvement. The president is back at the White House after intensive meetings this weekend at Camp David with his national security team. Pakistani senior officials will travel to Afghanistan on Monday to warn the Taliban they face a massive assault unless they hand bin Laden over to the United States. And President Bush acknowledges that he gave the go-ahead for the U.S. military to shoot down any authorized, unauthorized aircraft headed toward the White House or the Capitol as the terror attacks unfolded. The 4 hijacked jets, though, all crashed before the military could intercept them.
Joey, as we reported, the administration and Congress are examining ways to boost the nation's intelligence gathering capacity. They say intelligence will be a prominent pillar in the war against terrorism. Vice President Cheney addressed the matter in an interview today, and he also defended the intelligence community from charges that someone must have dropped the ball in not averting the attacks last Tuesday.
With respect to the intelligence area, there'll be, I'm sure, a lot of sort of Monday morning quarterbacking, second guessing, if you will, about whether or not there was an intelligence failure. Clearly, we did not learn of this operation, or we would have stopped it if we had. But I think it's important to remember that our men and women in the intelligence business out there all over the world, 365 days a year defending and protecting us, oftentimes very successful, oftentimes in ways we can never talk about. But we clearly need to do everything we can to forestall those kinds of activities by improving our intelligence capabilities, and this offers a lot of lessons learned. But we have to recognize, no matter how good we are, no matter how aggressively we pursue this, we're likely to be subject to that, partly by the very nature of our society. We're an open society. We love it that way. That's very important to preserve that and not to let the terrorists win by turning ourselves into some kind of police state. We also have to work, though, sort of the dark side, if you will. We've got to spend time in the shadows and in the intelligence world. A lot of what needs to be done here will have to be done quietly, without any discussion, using sources and methods that are available to our intelligence agencies if we're going to be successful. That's the world these folks operate in. And so it's going to be vital for us to use any means at our disposal, basically, to achieve our objective.
Vice President Cheney speaking today on NBC's Meet the Press. And in that interview, the Vice President also expressed support for CIA Director George Tenet, who's been the target of some criticism since Tuesday. Cheney said Tenet is doing a superb job. Another prominent official speaking out today as well, Secretary of State Colin Powell. Powell spoke at length with me on the nature of the conflict ahead and what the United States now expects of countries who may harbor terrorists. Here's Secretary Powell.
And we're going to make it clear to them that they must comply with previous directions they have received from the United Nations and other organizations to stop this, to expel this organization, to destroy this organization, or to help us to destroy this organization. And they will be held accountable for the support they have given to this organization if that's who we finally determined is responsible and we're going after them. They will have to make their choice, whether they want to be in the receiving end of the full wrath of the United States and others, or whether they want to get rid of this curse that they have within their country. I'm not carrying expectation. The only thing I'm looking for is results. They either do or they don't. It's binary, yes or no. You either respond to this crisis, this tragedy, this horrible thing that was perpetrated by perhaps al-Qaeda and Osama bin Laden, and all the indications point in that direction. You either respond and rip them up, help us rip them up, get rid of them, or you will suffer consequences. We're probably going to be in the counterterrorism business at a very high level of intensity for as long as anyone can imagine, as long as there are people out there who are willing to do the kinds of things those terrorists did this week. Then we're going to have to be on guard and constantly looking for them, trying to penetrate them and trying to stop them, and not just respond to them, but to stop them, get ahead of them. This is going to change the way we do business. It's going to change the way we go about our daily life here in the United States. It's going to require a greater emphasis on homeland defense, so we can defend ourselves against those who, notwithstanding our best efforts overseas, are still trying to get in to the country to hurt us. And so we should see this as a long-term campaign and do apply decisive force to it. And that force isn't just military force, it's all the elements of national power that are at our disposal.
Again, that was Secretary of State Colin Powell speaking with me earlier today. In that interview, Powell also echoed President Bush in saying Osama bin Laden remains the prime suspect for what occurred last Tuesday. As we told you, bin Laden today again denied any connection to the attacks. CNN's David Ensor listened to the remarks today by General Powell and Vice President Cheney. He joins us now with more on what the nation's leaders are preparing the American people for. David?
Well, they're preparing the American people, Wolf, for a very long war, as they have both said. And Secretary Powell, you heard, calling it, for the moment at least, very much an intelligence war and a law enforcement war more than a military one. The administration promising a thoroughgoing reassessment of the nation's intelligence capabilities, with talk on Capitol Hill by some of a major intelligence failure here, and obviously CIA is not happy they weren't able to warn about what happened in New York and Washington. The administration looking at some of the policies that are in place. For example, currently there are rules at the CIA that if anyone wants to hire an informant in, for example, a terrorist organization who has blood on his hands, that has to be checked out. Informants have to be checked out for their human rights record and for their criminal record before they can be put on. As Vice President Cheney made clear earlier today, that's going to change.
You need to have on the payroll some very unsavory characters if, in fact, you're going to be able to learn all that needs to be learned in order to forestall these kinds of activities. It is a mean, nasty, dangerous, dirty business out there, and we have to operate in that arena.
Going even further than that, Secretary of State Powell said that the policy since 1976 that the United States has had it was put in place by President Ford, banning any kind of political assassinations, even that policy is being looked at.
It's still on the books, and as part of our campaign plan, we're examining everything. How the CIA does its work, how the FBI and Justice Department does its work. Are there laws that need to be changed or new laws brought into effect to give us more ability to deal with this kind of threat? So everything is under review.
That's all well and good, say people over at the U.S. intelligence agencies, but it's still the hardest job there is to penetrate a terrorist cell. And that is what they now have to do, Wolf.
They have their mission out ahead of them. Thank you very much, David Ensor, our national security correspondent. On Capitol Hill, the chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee plans to introduce a bill this week creating an Office of Counterterrorism at the White House. For more on what's ahead on the Hill, here's CNN congressional correspondent Jonathan Karl. Tell us what's going on, John.
Well, Wolf, Congress is on what one top aide to the Speaker of the House called a war footing, working together, the congressional leadership, House and Senate, Democrat and Republican, on an absolute fast track, several separate tracks, working all efforts to aid what is being called the war effort here. First and foremost, I'll get to the point you just mentioned, but first and foremost is the question of aiding law enforcement by easing restrictions on law enforcement as they try to track down whoever was involved in these attacks. The Attorney General, John Ashcroft, spoke earlier today about this. This is what he had to say.
There are areas of our laws and procedures which give us better tools against organized crime, against illegal gambling, for example, than we have against terrorists. We need to make sure that we provide the maximum capacity against terrorists in the United States.
Now, the Attorney General is talking to congressional leaders today. In fact, right now, one of the things we're being told he is saying is that some of those who were involved in this attack may still be in the country and may still pose a terrorist threat. Therefore, he's asking for broad new powers for law enforcement, such as broadened powers to tap phone lines, and as what the Democratic leader in the House, Dick Gephardt, is calling a rebalancing of freedom and also of the right of law enforcement to go out and track these people down. Now, also you have what you mentioned, this notion of establishing a White House Office of Counterterrorism that's being compared to the Office of the Drug Czar, which was under President Clinton a cabinet-level position. It would be a person who would be in charge of all the counterterrorism efforts being done by other agencies like the FBI, like the CIA. Also, finally, they are calling the economy part of the national security equation up here, and Democratic and Republican lawmakers have been meeting and talking today about efforts to stimulate the economy, including that bailout of the airlines we've been talking about, including actually both Democrats and Republicans talking about a new round of tax cuts designed to stimulate the economy. Wolf, all this going on at a pace you've just never seen up here on Capitol Hill before, where the House and the Senate working together so they can pass these things and get them right to the president to sign. Back to you.
And with virtually no opposition, Jonathan Karl, thank you so much for joining us. Back to you, Joey.
Wolf, one of the big questions, of course, after the attacks on America, how do we prevent the kind of suicide hijackings that made Tuesday's devastation even possible? The Transportation Secretary, Norm Mineta, said today that he has appointed 2 new task forces. One will include pilots and airline officials who will focus on ways to stop terrorists from getting into the cockpits. The other will come up with ways to prevent terrorists from getting aboard planes in the first place.
Our national transportation system has become a target. Passenger vehicles have been transformed into lethal weapons in a profane and cowardly campaign of violence. This past week requires us to develop a new system that will move people and commerce safely and efficiently. And that is the mission before us.
While Secretary Mineta awaits recommendations from those task forces due October 1st, many people involved with airline regulation and the industry itself already are racking their brains for some ways to make sure that Tuesday's terror never happens again. CNN's Jean Meserve at some of the proposals that are now on the table.
For pilots, the rule of thumb in hijackings has always been be passive, be cooperative, get on the ground and into negotiations. Tuesday, the rules changed instantaneously. Commercial pilot Paul Emmons was in the air.
And my co-pilot and I basically looked at each other and said, "You want to fly or fight?" And he had his big steel flashlight, and if anybody came through the door, he was going to go after him, and I was going to get the airplane on the ground.
According to the Airline Pilots Association, pilots and flight attendants, the airlines, the FAA, and law enforcement are engaged in an unprecedented cooperative effort to improve aircraft security quickly.
We are at war, and we're treating it that way, and everybody's cutting through the red tape, making decisions.
Among the changes being considered on an expedited basis, whether to provide law enforcement escorts, whether to arm pilots with weapons, and how to modify equipment like the cockpit door so it is a more effective barrier.
This new door that we want I hope by Friday, really by Friday, I want a certification process approved by the FAA and the manufacturer in ALPA, and I believe we can have that, and then on our way to getting that door.
Some airlines have told their pilots to do what they must to save themselves, their aircraft, and their passengers. Pilot Paul Emmons says if his plane is under threat, passengers better hold on.
You should be wearing your seatbelt.
What does that mean?
We can start to maneuver that aircraft so that he cannot function.
Depressurize?
We can depressurize the aircraft, we can throw it around the sky, we can do all sorts of things, and he won't be walking when it's over.
Despite the financial distress of the airline industry, the Airline Pilots Association says no security measure is off the table, no matter what the expense. But some aviation watchdogs are critical. They say the problems and the solutions were known long ago, and they ask, why are we seeing corrections so late? Too late. Jean Meserve, CNN, Washington.
Update now on the aircraft in the air today. The 3 major airports in the New York area remain open today, but they are running far fewer flights than normal. 3 days after commercial airlines were cleared to take off again, LaGuardia and Kennedy airports are running about half the usual number of flights, but Newark International has been handling about 3/4 of its usual volume today.
Joey, there were strategies in place Tuesday that worked. Top defense officials tell CNN the FAA warned the Pentagon a hijacked commercial jet was headed that way at least 12 minutes before it hit. But the warning went unheeded there. CNN's military affairs correspondent Jamie McIntyre is at the Pentagon. Jamie, give us the perspective. What happened?
Well, just to be clear, Wolf, the FAA alerted NORAD, the North American Aerospace Defense Command, that a hijacked plane was heading toward Washington. And in response, the U.S. military scrambled just 2 minutes after that warning, three F-16 jets actually from Langley Air Force Base in Virginia, about 130 miles from here, and they screamed toward Washington at supersonic speed. Still, they arrived about 11 minutes after the American Airlines plane slammed into the Pentagon. There wasn't enough warning time to act to intercept those planes, but it might have been enough time to evacuate the Pentagon or other buildings in Washington had that decision been made. But Pentagon officials here say they were not informed of what was going on at the time. Meanwhile, President Bush said today, and Pentagon sources indicate that it was right after that incident that President Bush made his decision to allow U.S. Air National Guard planes to shoot down a hijacked United Airlines plane over Pennsylvania if it got close enough to threaten Washington. And Vice President Dick Cheney said today that that was President Bush's toughest decision of the day.
I gave our military the orders necessary to protect Americans, do whatever it would take to protect Americans. And of course that's difficult. Never did in anybody's thought process about how to protect America did we ever think that the evildoers would fly not one, but 4 commercial aircraft into precious U.S. targets.
And just to be clear, U.S. military planes that are now patrolling over the Northeast Corridor do not have carte blanche to shoot down hijacked planes. There's a number of procedures that would have to go through, but the government is working very hard to make sure that no pilot and no commander and the president doesn't have to make that kind of agonizing decision anytime in the future. Wolf?
Jamie McIntyre at the Pentagon, thank you very much. And as you may have seen within the past hour here on CNN, authorities are searching a house in Delray Beach, Florida that may have some connection with the events of last Tuesday. CNN's Susan Candiotti is there to explain what's going on. Susan?
Hello, Wolf. As if it wasn't surprising, the first time that the FBI searched this particular apartment complex earlier this week, at least surprising to the people who live around here, well, the FBI is back again, and they have been here for more than 3 hours, still searching one of the apartments, at least one of them, up on the 3rd floor of this apartment building in Delray Beach, Florida. That is in Palm Beach County. Now, they are searching the apartment, at least one of them, sources say, of some of the suspected hijackers involved in United Airlines Flight 93, an apartment said to have been lived in by Saeed Al-Ghamdi, Ahmed Al-Nami, and possibly a third hijacking suspect. Now, if that is the case, that would mean that at least 3 of the 4 suspected hijackers involved in commandeering United Airlines Flight 93 from Newark to San Francisco that crashed in Pennsylvania would have spent some time in this apartment complex at one time or the other before the attacks. Now, this search that is going on here is demonstrative of those that are going on nationwide as FBI agent conducts searches of various flight schools where some of the suspected hijackers receive training, looking at homes, looking at apartments, even checking out restaurants as these suspects apparently blended into the community along with their wives and children. Now, all of these people are believed linked to, according to the Justice Department, they are some of the 19 suspected hijackers, as well as those who are suspected of helping those suspected hijackers. Now, we are going to talk to a couple of the people, some who live in this complex here. First of all, Angela Browning. Angela, what do you think of learning that some of your neighbors might have been involved in hijacking those aircraft?
It's unbelievable. I mean, it's a quiet community. I just can't believe somebody like that would be here.
And turning to your friend here, Donna Durden, the president and vice president have asked that Americans try to get their lives back to normal. I am wondering if you feel as though your life has changed in any way, and if you're able to do that.
It's going to be a long time before my life is normal. My 2 sisters, my cousin were there when it was attacked. New York is my home. My life will never be the same again.
Thank you, both of us, for joining us. Now, both of you for joining us. As we understand it, the FBI figures to be here probably until around 7 or 8 o'clock this evening, and it is possible, they say, that they might make a brief statement when they are through here. Back to you, Wolf.
Susan Candiotti in Delray Beach, which is just south of Palm Beach. Thanks so much for joining us. And there have been several new developments in the FBI's efforts to locate and arrest those responsible for attacks. Eileen O'Connor is joining us now to update us on what's going on.
Well, Wolf, law enforcement sources say they are hitting pay dirt on finding possible accomplices or people who supported the dead hijackers. Now, here's just one example of some of the interconnections they're finding.
On Wednesday, authorities stopped an Amtrak train from St. Louis to San Antonio and took into custody 2 men, Mohammed Jawed Asmath and Ayub Ali Khan, on INS violations. Sources say the 2 had been booked on a flight from Newark to San Antonio on Tuesday. It had been diverted to St. Louis. Law enforcement sources say the men also possessed a chilling item: box cutters. Barbara Olson, wife of the Solicitor General, told her husband on a cell phone call from American Airlines Flight 77 that crashed into the Pentagon that the men who hijacked her plane used box cutters.
She told me that she had been herded to the back of the plane. She mentioned that they had used knives and box cutters to hijack the plane. She mentioned that the pilot had announced that the plane had been hijacked. I believe she said that. I had to tell her about the 2 airplanes that had hit the World Trade Center.
Law enforcement sources are looking into the possibility that Asmath and Al-Khan were headed for this house in San Antonio, owned by a man with a similar last name to 2 of the hijackers. He's now in custody on potential INS violations. They are also looking into this residence in Jersey City, New Jersey. Both Al-Khan and Asmath lived here. The FBI searched the home, and sources say are finding the information helpful. They are also looking into the possibilities that other people connected to the hijackers used this address at one time or another. The home in Jersey City is close to the mosque where Sheikh Omar Abdul Rahman used to preach before he went to prison for his role in inspiring the first attack against the World Trade Center in 1993.
What is also bothering authorities is that they did, according to law enforcement sources, have on a watch list 2 of the hijackers, and they say distributed that watch list, yet they were still able to get on one of those airplanes that crashed. And so authorities say that they are very disturbed by that, and also disturbed by the fact that they believe in this case they may have thwarted another hijacking, and they want to find those accomplices.
Eileen O'Connor, our national correspondent, thank you very much. Joey.
Wolf, of course, for many, this is Sunday, which is a day to give rise to faith in this country. Among the many Christians among this nation. At St. Patrick's Cathedral today, there's a special service. Of course, New York, in its grief, reaching out to all faiths. And at this particular service, the meaning of faith was quite apparent.
5 states.
A very familiar face to many in Midwestern politics. Governor Jesse Ventura of the state of Minnesota leading a rally in St. Paul, Minnesota earlier in the day. A bit of a chill there in the air, as you can see. The governor wearing a little bit of a wintry look. The governor speaking out to the citizens of his state. Let's listen to what he had to say.
I stand here today humbled, but comforted by your presence. That's what family is for, to share with each other the hurt, the sorrow, and the sadness that have fallen upon our country. While this gathering of Minnesota families is to comfort to what has happened, let it also be a sign of hope. Hope and determination that together, united in family, strengthened by love, driven by opportunity, and tempered by the respect for all humanity, we will overcome this tragic moment. We must.
Minnesota rallying under Governor Jesse Ventura. You will note that the governor is a former Navy SEAL himself and is wearing insignia today representing his role there. Wolf.
Joey, many people involved with the airline regulation and industry already were racking their brains for ways to make sure Tuesday's terror never happens again. And Americans, of course, are also filling churches across the nation this Sunday, many of them clutching Bibles and patriotic flags.
Indeed, border to border, nation to nation. This tragedy is felt by so many people throughout the world. Here, a look at the pain and the first steps today toward healing.
I'm sure a lot of you have probably noticed that there's been a lot of stuff going on this week. And so I'm going to recommend to all of you, when you get back, your mom and dad need you right now. And so when you get back to your mom and dad this morning, I want you to give them a big old hug and hold on to them and tell them you love them. And I bet they're going to do the same thing for you.
Yes, as difficult as it is, Jesus' command to forgive and to love our enemies calls us to eventually move beyond all of our mixed and tangled feelings toward that healing and wholeness which only God's justice and God's love can bring.
Question, I think, for every person today, and I'm sure everybody, it went through your mind. What if I'd been on that airplane with just a few minutes of life? What if I'd been sitting in one of those towers and looked up and saw that plane coming into my office building?
This is a dark day in America, but there has to be something that can sustain us. There has to be something that can hold us. There has to be something that can fortify us. There has to be something that can encourage us as we face these dark days.
I'm Wolf Blitzer in Washington.
And I'm Joey Chen at CNN Center in Atlanta. A special edition of Lou Dobbs' Moneyline begins in just a moment. First, the latest developments in America's new war.
President Bush is back at the White House after intensive planning sessions with his top aides at Camp David. Upon his arrival, Mr. Bush said the nation is confronting, quote, a new kind of evil. And he said the opponent will not be vanquished quickly.
This war on terrorism is going to take a while, and the American people must be patient. I'm going to be patient, but I can assure the American people I am determined. I'm not going to be distracted. I will keep my focus to make sure that not only are these brought to justice, but anybody who's been associated will be brought to justice.
Trade Center attacks. He approved the downing of the fourth hijacked passenger plane. As we all know, the fourth plane crashed before it reached Washington. In New York today, a new view of the utter devastation that runs for blocks and blocks in lower Manhattan. Today, the number of missing is 5,097. 180 is the number of confirmed dead. The Pentagon death toll is 188. Two other developments. The Bush administration and Congress are examining ways to relax restrictions against the CIA. One such restriction is the ban on political assassinations. And Attorney General John Ashcroft says he will ask Congress for expanded law enforcement powers, including broader authority in using wiretaps. The administration says intelligence and law enforcement will represent major components in the war against terrorism. Joey?
Amid all the thinking about plans ahead and what to do now, a pause, a moment to remember. At St. Patrick's Cathedral in New York right now, a special service is underway for those of all faiths to stop and remember. Cardinal Egan speaking now.
In what we have come to call Ground Zero, but which I call Ground Hero. It now falls to all of us to take the next steps as the smoke at the World Trade Center dissipates and ceases to rise. How will we deal with these next steps? The formula of the Apostle Paul in our first reading this evening is the answer I would propose. We will not lose heart because our inner being is renewed each day. We will confirm ourselves in goodness and holiness. We will keep our eyes, fasten our gaze on the unseen Father in heaven, whose providence is never, ever to be called into question. If this be our approach, I have the greatest confidence as to what lies before us. I am sure that we will continue to console the mourning and care for the hurting with unflagging sympathy and love. I am sure that we will seek justice in this tragedy as citizens of a nation under God, in which hatred and desires for revenge must never have a part. I am sure that we'll allow no group or groups in our diverse but united community to be accused or abused because of the outrageous misdeeds of individuals. I am sure that we will not harbor thoughts of war of any kind without careful, prayerful consideration of what is right and just before the one God and Father of us all. I am sure that we will roll up our sleeves and rebuild the scarred sectors of our beloved city with enthusiasm and wholesome New York-style pride.
Cardinal Egan at St. Patrick's Cathedral at this hour, a special service to honor the memory of all those lost at the World Trade Center, at the Pentagon, and of course in Western Pennsylvania this week as well. Friday was more the formal National Day of Prayer and Mourning, but the prayer, the remembrance, and the mourning go on. To our viewers, we'll have breaking news on the latest developments in the investigation at any time here on CNN. Now we want to go to New York in a special edition of Lou Dobbs' Money Law. Lou?
Joy, thank you very much. 5 days after the worst attack ever on American soil, New York City and Wall Street are preparing to go back to work. Amidst the rubble that was the World Trade Center and much of what we refer to as Wall Street, the search for survivors is still going on. Countless workers are struggling also to restore telephone, water, and power to the area. Wall Street needs all of those services, of course, and more to get back to business tomorrow. Dry runs at the various stock exchanges went well yesterday. The Securities and Exchange Commission late today gave the New York Stock Exchange approval to go ahead and return to trading. The exchange tonight appears ready for its 9:30 opening tomorrow morning. Bill Himmer is in downtown Manhattan, and he has been looking over the site and also seeing how preparations are going as thousands of workers prepare to return to the area tomorrow morning. Bill?
Yeah, Lou, the news continues down here, and the news again today is not good. The mayor has put the missing total now over 5,097 still missing inside the World Trade Center. The rubble you see behind me now becoming known as the pile here at the southern end of Manhattan. They're still calling it a search and rescue mission, still trying to see it this time and hold on the hope that someone, possibly more than one person, can be found alive inside the rubble. But you know, as the days continue to go by, the hope fades day by day here in southern Manhattan. You know, in 136 years' time, the New York Fire Department here has lost fewer than 800 men and women, but already we're looking at more than 300 firefighters still missing at this point. That branch and unit of New York has certainly taken an awful and tragic hit throughout this entire ordeal. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers informing us of looking through 5 buildings still standing right now on the perimeter of the former World Trade Center. Still looking at those for possible precarious positions in terms of structural damage, going through there trying to make sure they're indeed safe and sound. Also, we're getting word too from the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers that they're trying to put together a plan at this point to go ahead and take the rubble out at a much quicker pace. We've seen workers for 5-6 days now taking them out by each truckload, but they'd like to expedite that at this time. They're trying to put together a plan in order to do that. It's a daunting task. Some estimate that more than 500,000 tons of rubble still on the ground here on the streets of Manhattan. Getting some words today of theft. Some engineers coming out of those buildings saying that a number of the ones still standing have been vandalized. In parts, we're hearing some offices broken into, a coffee shop or two robbed in the scene, and that is not the best positive news we're hearing thus far. The smoke and the steam you see coming off, still fires burning in certain areas, and as the water continues to treat these areas, you see the steam rising as a number of parts inside that pile again continue to be quite hot from the devastation on Tuesday. Some say that steel in that building exceeded 1,000 degrees after Tuesday's attack. Lou, back to you.
Bill, thanks. Bill Himmer. Well, a lot of companies make up what we call Wall Street, not only the exchanges and the brokerages, but the firms that support all of the trading activity down there. And through this weekend, the employees of those companies have been struggling to get back to downtown Manhattan into the Wall Street area to prepare for tomorrow. Chris Huntington has spent much of the past 2 days down there and has this report for us. Chris?
As utility workers laid the groundwork for restoring power, the New York Stock Exchange unfurled its message to the world. Wall Street will be back in business Monday morning. The debris of terror still covers the financial district, but there is unanimous determination to shake it off.
Monday we're going to try to open and we're going to clean it.
Hopefully back to normal if we can get deliveries, coffee in the morning, donuts, Danish.
We're just trying to clean up first, put everything together, trying to wake up from this nightmare, and that I think we'll get back even better than what we used to be.
The Federal Reserve Bank of New York set a defiant and patriotic tone on Saturday, blaring marching music from a corner of its stone fortress. Businesses in the financial district are now in a war zone. There are security checkpoints throughout the area.
Just let me see that you have credentials for 45 John.
And many streets remain off limits.
The area's now frozen.
Okay. You know how long that's going to be?
Buildings are all unsafe. The buildings on John Street are unsafe.
As of late today, a huge area of the financial district is so damaged that hundreds of businesses will be shut out of their offices indefinitely, including American Express, Merrill Lynch, and Lehman Brothers in the World Financial Center. The partners of Aetna Judicial Services were lucky. They managed to retrieve their files just before authorities put their building off limits.
So our business is basically in 5-6 bags that thanks to my partner we were able to grab out of the office. We're up and running better than probably most businesses today.
The priority tonight on Wall Street is to restore power and communications. The latest word from Con Edison, the utility here in New York City, is that 9,300 customers are without electricity. And Verizon, the regional phone company, reports that it is focusing on the network between the New York Stock Exchange and its member firms. A Verizon spokesman would only say that there is still a lot of work to be done.
Lou?
Chris, thank you. And despite all of that, it still appears, according to the New York Stock Exchange, that all is ready for a go tomorrow morning to begin trading at 9:30 a.m. Bruce Francis is down at the New York Exchange and tells us, are they ready? Bruce?
Lou, they say they are, even though testing will continue tonight and probably into the wee hours. Of course, testing the stock exchange is a continuous matter, even in times of non-emergency. Still, they do maintain here at the New York Stock Exchange that everything is ready to go. All systems go for that 9:30 opening bell. Still, in the neighborhood, businesses have been scrambling to get ready.
Nick Liberatos usually serves up hundreds of breakfasts at this coffee shop just 3 blocks away from the NYSE. But as the traders he caters to get back to work, he and his employees will be cleaning up $20,000 worth of rotting food.
I don't know when I can have supplies delivered to the store, like milk, bread, produce. Nobody can come in, so we don't know what to do. And we don't know when we could open.
Although much of the financial district is open to a surprising amount of foot traffic, security is tight in the immediate vicinity of the exchange.
That's my two-wall building pass, but here's my driver's license.
The New York Stock Exchange continued its second day of testing. Several firms, including the nation's largest broker, Merrill Lynch, have had to relocate to buildings outside of the financial district. The NYSE says that computer and communications inside the exchange are working fine, as are key links between members. The neighborhood's workers are hanging tough.
I'd be lying if I said I wasn't scared, but I'm certain that we'll get through.
America is strong and we will do the best. I'm 100% for that.
I'm confident. I'm not afraid.
The opening tomorrow, Lou, will also be a major test for the city's transportation system. Subways are open, although major lines will be moving much more slowly. We have one major Hudson River crossing that still isn't open. That's, of course, the Holland Tunnel. And, of course, commuter trains from New Jersey. Those who used to go to the World Trade Center aren't running either. So, Lou, it is a test way beyond the walls of this exchange.
Okay, Bruce. Thanks, Bruce Francis. One of the neighbors, if you will, of what was the World Trade Center is the World Financial Center, and prominent in that facility and complex is the American Express building. The American Express building, evacuated, fears that it also had structural damage and questions about its structural integrity. But American Express says it's ready for business, and the man who knows and decides whether it's ready for business is here with us now. Ken Chenault, the CEO, the chairman of American Express. Ken, good to have you with us.
Glad to be here.
For like all of us who work in this city, this has been an incredible period for you and for all of your employees, but you're confident that you can be back to work and ready to go tomorrow morning.
Yes, I think clearly this is a tragedy of epic proportions, but we're very confident that we will be able to manage on. In fact, throughout this horrible tragedy, American Express has been functioning for all of our businesses. We, in fact, have not been able to go back into the building, but that has not stopped us from providing services to our customers.
And you've actually had to take other space and to relocate your employees in very short order, have you not?
Yes, we in fact have had to secure space for close to 5,000 employees in the tri-state area.
Ken, if we can, I'm going to ask Chris Valenti, our director, that your building, the American Express building, is prominent behind us. I'm going to ask if we can get a shot. It is on the left side, the uppermost, the tallest structure there. Now, we have heard alternately over the course of the past 4 days the American Express building is in danger, that it is fine, that they have found structural problems, that indeed the structural integrity has been assured. Where are we today?
My best knowledge is that the building is structurally sound. That's what we understand. But the very important point, Lou, and I've said this to our organization, that American Express is not defined by its headquarters building. It's defined by its people and its spirit and its character. And wherever our employees physically reside, that is American Express.
Well, that's wonderfully said, and I know it's got to be incredibly frustrating to you as the CEO to be given alternate stories as to whether or not the basic structure of your building is, in point of fact, intact. When do you think you'll know?
I think that hopefully over the next several days and weeks we will know, but the most important part of my job is to make sure that we're meeting the needs of our employees and customers, and we are doing that irrespective of the condition of the building.
And my guess is that those who run every major firm down there and every other firm would probably feel much the same way. We've got a lot of talk about what to expect when the New York Stock Exchange opens tomorrow. I think it's wonderful that people are talking about when it opens, because this is, after all, just a gargantuan project against absurd hurdles to do it. What do you think will happen tomorrow?
I do not believe that there will be panic. I think what's very important is that this country has weathered crises before. And I believe that we have the strongest financial system in the world. We have the most efficient capital markets. And I believe that there will be calm. There certainly will be ups and downs in the market. There clearly are short-term concerns. But I believe that the American people will have faith in the financial markets.
Let me ask you to do this, Ken. As people are watching us, millions of people, not only in this country but around the world, a lot of people are going to have to make a lot of judgments tomorrow. Any advice you want to give them?
What I would say is don't be short-sighted. Focus on what your long-term financial objectives are. See what happens. Don't make snap judgments. And in fact, have faith that we do indeed have a very strong economy.
Ken Chenault, CEO of American Express, thanks for being with us.
Thank you.
Well, we've seen the physical signs of Americans pulling together in this time of crisis, blood drives, fundraising, volunteerism. Now Americans are pulling together emotionally. We have the most recent CNN Gallup poll. It was released just hours ago. And when asked, do you approve or disapprove of the way President George W. Bush is handling his job, Mr. Bush received an 86% approval rate. That is 35% higher than just a week ago. Gallup also asked, do you think the United States should or should not take military action in retaliation for the attacks on the World Trade Center and the Pentagon? 88% surveyed said Americans should take action, while 8% said we should not. Americans also showed a lot more support for the economy. And Frank Newport, the Gallup organization, joins us now. Frank, tell us about your findings.
Well, Lou, the presidential approval rally effect is what pollsters have called that for many years as evidence of what we're seeing. Let me show you another measure, which is, are you satisfied or dissatisfied with the way things are going in the United States? This is a measure a lot of people thought would drop from last weekend to this weekend, but look at the trend here. From last weekend, it had gone down to 43%, all the way up to 61%, an 18-point rise in that measure of overall satisfaction. It does translate over to our economic measures that we updated last weekend to this weekend. That slide that we are seeing stopped, actually, when we ask Americans rate the economy. The percent saying excellent or good is actually back up. You can see 15 percentage points or so. Even when we ask Americans, comparing last weekend to this weekend, where do you think the economy is going, we find a increase in the percent, not dramatic, but an increase down here in the percent who say they think the economy is going to be better looking ahead rather than worse. So all in all, this rally effect looks like it's translating over to economic measures. Not all measures. We did say, personally, do you think you'll be better off or worse off a year from now? And we really found stability in that measure, not a dramatic change either way. But all in all, this kind of rally effect could have an impact on consumer confidence and spending, which might be a positive sign for the economy. One last point, Lou. Stock investors. Did the tragedies of Tuesday make you more likely or less likely to want to invest in stocks? Vast majority says no change whatsoever, and actually slightly a few more stock investors say they're more likely to invest now rather than less likely. That goes to the hypothesis we just heard that we don't anticipate any kind of great panic, at least from investors, and it looks like the average American out there may be solid in terms of his or her spending. Lou, that's an update.
Frank, we just heard Ken Chenault, the CEO of American Express, tell Americans to keep the faith, and apparently that is exactly what they intend to do based on the findings in your poll. That is certainly reassuring. Ted Weisberg is a veteran floor trader at the New York Stock Exchange. He was just a few blocks from the World Trade Center at the time of the attack. He has worked through, of course, bear markets and bull markets, through slow economic times and better. But tomorrow he's facing something he's never faced before on Wall Street. Ted is here now, and he is joined to his left by Christine Romans, who spends her days usually at the New York Stock Exchange. Ted, let me begin with you, with your experience, your view. I'm going to ask you the same question I asked Ken Chenault. What happens tomorrow?
Well, I really don't know. But the good thing is, I guess, if there's anything good at all, that we've had 5 or 6 days to think about things and to gather our thoughts, and hopefully investors will not act emotionally, and they'll think clearly. And
well, you know, I think your experience over this period of time, one thing we've seen, the professionals, if you will, sometimes don't always fall in line perfectly, but it seems the private investor, the little guy, as he or she is sometimes referred to, seems to always be the wisest in these markets. Has that been your experience?
Well, I think it depends on what time period you're talking about, but we know that so much of stock trading, Lou, is emotionally driven,
right.
And we are clearly in a highly emotional period of time at the moment. And I think to the degree to which investors and traders will be successful, if in fact it's success we're going to try to achieve here in the next couple of days.
You're the professional. Are we going to see it open at 9:30? And if we do, what's it going to look like operationally?
Oh, I think absolutely we'll open at 9:30. I don't think the stock exchange would say they would if they couldn't. I think they'll be 100%, and I think everybody will be ready to go. It's the world's greatest stock exchange. It's a huge institution.
You, like nearly all of us who live and work in this city, has experienced loss and shared pain with those who have suffered loss. What will be the psychology, the mood in the exchange tomorrow?
Well, I think that most of us probably don't want to be there, but that's where we'll be. That's our job, and that's where we'll be. I think given a choice, we'd rather be over working with the volunteers, searching for survivors, but I think the mood will be as upbeat as possible under the circumstances.
When a few blocks away, the search for now more than 5,000 missing victims of this disaster goes on. Hundreds and hundreds of workers, rescue workers, they're trying to find those bodies and hopefully find some who can be rescued. What are your emotions tonight as you get ready to go to work tomorrow?
Well, I'm very sad, and I have been sad for days like most people. And every once in a while I find tears coming to my eyes, and I mean, it's just terrible. But Wednesday I was frozen, and Thursday I started to work a little bit from home, and Friday a little more, and I've been downtown both yesterday and today, and it's like falling off a horse. You just have to get back on and keep going.
Well, Christine Romans, Ted, we have not let get off that horse. She has been there day after day. Christine, your thoughts as you get ready to go back to work tomorrow morning?
Well, you know, one thing that traders and investors and hedge fund managers keep telling me is it would be foolhardy to try to predict exactly what's going to happen on the open, but it would be foolish not to be ready for absolutely any scenario. And they're saying they're going to sit back, they're going to look at their screens, they're going to answer their phones, and whatever investors throw at them, they're going to have to execute those orders. And it's almost as though they are the rescue workers in a way when they say, you know, all we can do, we can't go there and dig out bodies, but we can go there and we can start trading stocks again and show America and the rest of the world that you've got to get back to business and the economic machine rolls on. But Lou, there are some curbs and there's some trading limits, of course, in futures and in the Dow as well. So any kind of big sell-off, there will be levels. If that were to happen, there would be levels that would mitigate that.
And has been pointed out by a lot of people, the best way to defeat terrorists is to show that we simply cannot be defeated and to move ahead with our work and our lives. Ted, I want to thank you for being with us. Christine, thank you very much. We're going to go now to the chairman of the New York Stock Exchange, Dick Grasso. He is the man responsible for moving this incredible enterprise back into operation, 9:30 tomorrow morning. Dick, I know this is a difficult time for you. You couldn't be busier. We appreciate you taking the time. How goes it?
Good evening, Lou. Great to be with you. It's been a difficult time for all Americans, but as one of your guests said earlier, we are ready to go 9:30 tomorrow morning, and the best way of communicating to these criminals that they've been unsuccessful is for us to ring that bell and be back in business, and we intend to do that.
Dick, we've heard from a number of people that they are concerned about transportation into the region. Thousands of people have to get there not only to work at the exchange, but to provide you the necessary support to conduct some $45 to $50 billion worth of business every day. How does that look to you tonight?
It looks great, Lou, and my deep thanks to the city and state and federal agencies who have worked tirelessly to make certain that all forms of public transportation that can indeed be delivered to the southern tip of Lower Manhattan will be in place, and we've got some new forms and some new routes, so we're very comfortable. And thanks to the tens of thousands of hardworking people from the city and state, we're back in business.
Good. Dick, let's talk about a few practical matters. 1, short selling. 2, liquidity. How you're going to conduct an orderly market. 3, how to clear it. Any special provisions there that you can share with us tonight?
Well, as to short selling or any one particular investment strategy, all have been, in essence, cleared to come back into the market, Lou. I think it's important, as Chairman Hart, who's done a magnificent job, has said, we should not restrict the free market process from working. However, the government, and again, I've got to give great credit to Treasury Secretary O'Neill, to Harvey Pitt, the chairman of the SEC, to Alan Greenspan and the folks from the New York Fed, have said we're going to make it easier for companies to buy back their shares. Public pension plans have communicated their great faith in the marketplace. Lou, as time and again history has proven, America in a moment of challenge rises, and indeed we will overcome this moment of great tragedy.
Dick, we thank you very much. We look forward to seeing you tomorrow morning.